This is an AMI podcast.
That is one good thing about this world. There are always sure to be more springs. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review on AMI Audio. Thanks for joining us on this weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks, starting with a quote. And we are, of course, featuring quotes in April that are spring and new beginnings, because it's such a nice vibe. I just love that spring comes around only once a year. I'm not saying it's my favorite season, but it's getting there. It just feels so refreshing. This quote is from Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery, Lucy Montgomery. So this is, of course, from the Anne of Green Gables series. If you were a fan like I was, then the quote itself will kind of give you that, oh, that's nice. This sounds like something Anne would say. Well, it definitely was something that Anne said in the series. Nizreen, coming over to you. Did you ever read the Anne of Green Gables series, or were you ever into it? Because it was trending regardless of whether you read it or not.
I haven't gotten the chance to, but I'm curious.
I mean, Anne of Green Gables, of course, Canadian staple, right? PEI based, and just I think it's more the energy that Anne brings to us when you're flipping through Anne of Green Gables books or hearing it like the story that it is. You feel like you're going back to childhood. The descriptions, the places, the small town feel, the transitions and transformations that you get to go through with Anne herself, Anne with an E. I think it's just something to marvel because even if you've read it, I would just say the first book is my favorite because that's the book that takes you to the beginning of Anne, the beginning of having the family, going through school, and her personality comes out in the first book. And then after that, you get attached or you don't. But I got attached. But it is something to explore for sure. I know there was the TV shows, and now there's the legit, like, real life Anne on CBC and Netflix. So you get to explore it in all these different ways. But the imagination of the books is uncomparable to anything else out there. So big shout out to Lucy Montgomery. So moving on, let's look at the CELA homepage right now. We like to check out the featured titles, 3 of them at the very top. The first one is Daughters of the Deer by Danielle Daniel. This is a historical fiction, and we checked it out last week on the podcast. The next one is Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley. Family and relationship category, this one. And the third one in featured is Moon Witch, Spider King by Marlon James, and this is a fantasy title. All right, Nizreen, you have what's trending. So what's going on in the book, the audiobook world?
So I have 2 things to mention, starting off with audiobooks.com releasing this week's hottest releases. So I want to list down 5, the top 5 books. So we start off with The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, The Candy House by Jennifer Egan, Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis, Again Rachel by Marianne Keyes, and the last one I'll mention is Idiots, Marriage, Money, Milk, and Mistakes by Laura Clary. The second thing I want to mention is audiobooks.com also tweeted out about their spring sales, $7 or less. And the sale starts now and is until April 17. There is a great selection here. So there's Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter, Own the Day, Own Your Life, Optimized Practices for Waking, Working, Learning, Eating, Training, Playing, Sleeping, and Sex by Aubrey Marcus. And next we have You Don't Know Me by Sarah Foster. And finally, Nowhere to Run by CJ Box. And if you want to know the rest, there's so much to look into the sale. Again, $7 or less. That's great prices here on audiobooks.com. Check that out. Ramya, I would like to know, how much are you willing to spend on audiobooks or books in general?
Okay, so You may or may not already know that I'm an Audible member. Big surprise. So I do spend the monthly membership cost on Audible. Now, I am quite stubborn and I still haven't moved to audible.ca. This is a bit of a side note tangent. I'm still with audiobooks, audible.com, and not wanting to move over to the .ca platform. I don't know what it is at this point that I'm holding on to. I think both platforms are quite similar. But anyway, so I'm willing to put in that monthly. Now, whenever there's sale prices like this, I think of our friend Ryan Hui, who joined us a while ago, because he is a big sale guy. Like whenever there's sales, he is so vocal about spending that extra. Me, not so much. I wait for the 2-for-1 credits on Audible where where they give
Good for
members the
me.
opportunity. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I'm already paying for the 1 credit, so, but I also double up on audiobooks by signing up for the accessible platforms like Sela and the Toronto Public Library. So
Hmm.
wherever I can get my audiobooks, I do and I will. But there is the odd time where I would listen to a narrator from the library or from Sela, so where you get the books for free, and then think, I'm gonna spend my Audible credit on this book because I love the production or I love the sample with the narrator that Audible used, or I just love the production value, the clear, the crisp, the
Hmm.
way to speed up. So if there is ever a choice of quality or something that's not available on something else that is for free, or the waiting list is long on the Toronto Public Library and it's not available on Sela, then yes, I'll spend the extra money. But I'm privileged to say that right now we have our choices, Nizreen. So we don't exactly have to spend the money or exactly have to wait 2 months for an audiobook that you want to read right now. You do have the choices, which is nice.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how you thought it through. You thought it all the way through. I thought about it too, and I was just wondering. I like the sales so much. I'm the type of person that likes sales, and especially when it comes to books, where
Shopping
for me,
spree.
I just think, yeah, I know. I just think about, I'm only gonna read it once or listen to it once. Like
Mm, good
there's
point.
a slim chance that I'm gonna go back to this book. Very slim chance. So I'm thinking, how much am I willing to spend on a one-time read? And
Yeah.
I'm thinking I wouldn't spend over $15 or so, or like
Okay, that's
I'm
like the
just
membership
seeing the
fee.
20s. Yeah, exactly. And I would
Right.
pay the membership fee. No more than that.
Okay.
I mean,
Uh,
unless it's an amazing audiobook, I don't see myself paying more than that. I'm just the stubborn type where I'm like, I'm just gonna read it once. What do I need uh
yeah.
to spend this much on an audiobook?
And ownership is very different when you're not purchasing hardcovers and soft covers and actual physical copies of books, right? Like we're paying for memberships and we have the book in our library. That's what we paid
Mhm.
for, but it's not the same as owning your copy of a book physically.
Mm.
So definitely like when you're borrowing from Sela, borrowing from libraries, borrowing from Nels, you're borrowing. You're giving that book back. So that's great that we have the access for it. But if you want to keep that book because you love Harry Potter so much and you want to read it over and over and over again,
That's
yeah,
you. That's
maybe
you.
you'll pay
There's
for.
no one
Oh,
else
it's
like
just
you,
me.
Emil.
Oh, This is AMI Audiobook Review, where we love discussing audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramya Amuddin. I'm also here joined by Nisreen Abdel Majid, and we'll get to our special guest in a bit. But let's start with a pause or play. This is a book that is from the Sela Library homepage, one of their featured titles at the moment. You can go to celalibrary.ca to get all of the details on the book. So, Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley is the family and relationships category. Let's explore it by reading the synopsis. Sarah Polley's Run Towards the Danger explores memory and the dialogue between her past and her present. These are the most dangerous stories of my life. The ones that I've avoided, the ones I haven't told, the ones that have kept me awake on countless nights. As these stories find echoes in my adult life, and then went another better way than they did in childhood, they became lighter and easier to carry. There are 6 essays in this collection, and each one captures a piece of Polly's life as she remembers it, while at the same time examining the fallibility of memory, the mutability of reality in the mind, and the possibility of experiencing the past anew as the person you are now, but were not then. Polly contemplates stories from her own life, ranging from stage fright to high risk childbirth to endangerment and more. Rather than live in a protective crouch, she had to run towards the danger. Sarah Polly explores what it is to live in one's body in a constant state of becoming, learning, and changing. So, here we go around the table as we do always to press pause or play. Nizreen, coming to you first. What do you think of the title?
Honestly, I'm confused at this point. I there's a lot to grasp here, so I'm confused about what it's all about. I'm curious at the same time. Like I'm into it. I'm invested. So I'm gonna press play. Give
Oh,
it a go.
okay. Wow, it's a switch up. I thought you were definitely going to press pause when you started with I'm confused. Okay, going around the table to Mike. Mike, your thoughts, pause or play on this title?
I would probably investigate something like that. I'd press play. It's a memoir of sorts, and so that can always be interesting. It sounds like she's had quite an interesting life, and
Mm.
that could be worth checking out.
All right, I agree. I think I'd press play on this one. I totally feel I can empathize with the confusion in a way because Nizreen, I definitely had to read the synopsis multiple times in order to understand exactly what's going on
Mhm.
with the sentence structure, specifically the way that it's written, the literary approach. So it's the first time you're hearing it, so you're like, huh? But I would press play because I'm curious about this psychological effect in general. So this is Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polly. Again, you can check it out on the Sela homepage if you want to go take a quick look. So you heard the voice of our guest today. We love to check in with audiobook listeners, avid audiobook listeners here on the show, opening up the space to review, discuss, recommend, browse, conceptualize, and reminisce on audiobooks. Michael Feir, our guest for today, is uh, an audiobook fan and an overall audio entertainment fan as well. He's also the tech expert who joins us weekly on Kelly and Company on AMI Audio. Welcome to the show, Mike. Lots of questions for you.
Thanks. Well, happy to be here.
So, do you have a memory of when you first started to discover audio? Because you're a Braille user as well, Mike. And I'm curious, what about audio got you so wrapped in?
Well, what really started it was how bulky Braille is. You look at a vest,
Good a reason as
pocket.
any.
That Braille is thick and heavy and huge at times. Like you want a Stone Angel. There's a prime example of a ghastly book to read. And one volume of that book is something like 6 volumes in Braille, thin ones, thankfully, but still, one of them was enough to put me to sleep 6 times in a weekend. So, do you want to have a whole house full of Braille and nothing but just to have the same kind of variety, or do you spend the money on audiobooks? At the time, of course, I didn't have a Braille display, so it was a kind of a no-brainer. That was one thing that just plunged me into Audible books. And of course, the CNIB had talking books before CELA sort of became what we know today. The CNIB it grew out of the CNIB library, and they did all the narration, the digital work, and I would get these cassettes in the mail as a kid, and they'd be in these big thick pouches, and you'd open up the pouch and you'd hope all the cassettes were there, and you hope the tape wouldn't get eaten by a rogue tape recording machine as you listen to it. So I've been listening to books for just as even longer than I've been reading them. So audio and I go way back. And then of course when Audible came on the scene, that was just wow. All of a sudden, all of these books, I didn't have to wait for someone to think, oh, let's make this book accessible. It was just there,
Right.
and I could pay the same amount of money as a sighted person to get my hands on it.
Yep.
And that was amazing. That was
Equitable
like opening up the
access.
world. Audible does a good job of making their app accessible, and they really did that since the beginning. The early days with Windows and stuff. When I first got into Audible, they had their Audible Manager that was accessible back on the computer, and of course now on the phone. God, the amount of books you can store in a pocket is just stunning.
And see,
these
that's
days.
the question I had for you next, which is, are there favored platforms, or does it really depend on who you are as an individual? I'm not talking stats, but just the fact that there's so much choice out there now, right? Me and Nazreen talked about this a couple of minutes ago, and then audiobooks.com and Big Finish Audio, even just beyond audiobooks, just audio entertainment. There's people doing this so well.
Well, the thing was, now Audible is at a point where there's so much audio entertainment beyond books that even if you got all your books elsewhere, I would say it's still worth getting an Audible membership to tap into what Audible makes available entertainment-wise. So they really have it all. Like everything eventually pretty much gets to Audible. Just what you find is platforms like Big Finish and some of the others, the LHS, Lovecraft Historical Society, the graphicaudio.net, they have a period of exclusivity before that happens, before it goes to Audible, where they're the ones, because they make those dramas, they get first crack, right? So there's that period of where you can't find it on Audible, but you can get it from these other platforms. So if you're patient, you can wait, and eventually all will come to Audible, and you can just use your credits on them.
Right.
But then
One-stop
you can
shop.
use your credit. Yeah, it can be once, and that can be kind of advantageous for people less technically skilled. You only have to learn one place and such. There are advantages, but I would just assume browse around and take advantage of all the different places.
Do you have a prediction of what might be the next big audio trend? So I'm talking about things like, when full cast audio production became a thing where you had multiple narrators, or this whole thing right now where celebrities are narrating their own memoirs and authors are narrating their own audiobooks, that kind of thing. Do you feel like there's something else in the works that is becoming something?
I'm not really sure. Certainly, there's more. You've got Audible kind of monopolizing this market and pulling everything there. So that kind of domination, it's going to take something pretty spectacular to undo that. And I don't know what's left. I mean, we have 3D audio where you have things like Impact Winter and other dramas that I've covered in full 3D sound that totally immerses you. You have older school kind of audio dramas that go way back to the 30s, same kind of techniques, much better sound, right? So that is present. Basically, you've got full-length books that Graphic Audio does, and they basically take a whole book and give you all the words. You don't miss out on any of the words because it's all narrated. Right. And then they add in performance, like in movie music and everything else. So you get the full, like if you ever wondered what a book would sound like dramatized fully, that's where you go to find out. So I'm not really sure what's left to do. There's always room for improvement in technique, and I think we'll certainly see that. But I don't know what's left to explore, other than, of course, higher quality sound. Like there might be, for example, Dolby Atmos. Perhaps that will happen more than you already sort of have surround sound in some things, but maybe it'll spread more as data storage costs and everything else go down, production techniques advance so that it's less costly to add sound effects of that caliber. That could happen.
Yeah, because there's so many different elements, right? It's not just the production, it's also the technological value of certain things and the user base that's going to be taking part in this type of entertainment and how that's growing. And then there's the marketing aspect, and then there's the copyright and what you have access to as Audible or whoever else, like X platform. But that's really interesting, Mike. It's nice to talk to you on that level of technology as well when it comes to audio entertainment. So I want to move on to recommendations because you're going through, I don't know, would you call it a phase right now, or but just in general, you love these short stories. Short stories.
Yes. Oh, boy, you got your balking backwards and then
I
your
know
cheddars
what just happened.
Rewind.
Yeah, short stories.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this pandemic, I mean, it's getting kind of heavy at points, and sometimes you don't want a novel seems too big. You want something smaller. You want something that you can just pass some time and not get not have to stop and be left hanging necessarily. And short stories are great for that. And I like it even better when the authors take the time to give you notes on where the ideas of the short stories come from. That can be absolutely fascinating.
Hmm.
So, for example, Ted Chiang is one of the authors I highly recommend. You can get his books on Audible, of course, and they better be in Sela. Those are amazing books. He writes exquisitely well structured short stories. I'm thinking of one the one in Stories of Your Life and Others that became a blockbuster movie was called Arrival. And it basically looks at what happens when, if you knew that you couldn't change anything in your life, if you knew there
Right.
was no such thing as free will, and that time is not like we look at time in a linear way, but this book posits that aliens arrive, they have a language, and learning that language, part of it is learning about a different perception of time, and all of a sudden the future, your whole future, right? And you can't change it. Is life still worth living without free will?
Mm.
Fascinating topics. There was another book he did called Exhalation, his second collection of stories. Another fascinating book. He did a story in that one about basically the African tribe that suddenly is faced with the introduction of writing. Missionaries come to stay with them, and they have this thing called writing. And what is it? What does it do? How does it affect how you think? Right? Because their tradition was oral. They did everything audibly, right? Passed down stories from generation to generation. It was all done
Hmm.
audibly. So what happens when things get fixed in writing and your words get fixed and ideas get written down? What does that do? And then juxtapose that with a future with a father and daughter in a relationship. And he is coming to terms with a new technology called Remem that basically records your every waking moment of life and all your experiences. And you can look back at any time in the future and go, oh, that's what really happened, right? So there's none of these arguments about,
Oh my
well, you
gosh.
said this, right? You said that, and you said
Black
this, and that's
Mirror.
why I did this. Yeah, you can look back and find out who said what for real. And there's no arguing because there's usually a lot of recordings from a lot of different, if there are anyone around, then, it's their recording too, right? So you always have verification, right? So what do you do? What does that do to relationships? What does that do to your conception of yourself in memory if you cannot forget, right?
So is
Another neat
all
one is
his writing themed around this kind of thing, like
uh,
the
it,
philosophical
it's
dystopian?
it's the implicate, and it's not always dystopian, I would say, but it's how these technologies might affect us. What thinking might they open? Like if you
Right.
can communicate with a self in another universe, in a parallel universe, but only for so long before that communication runs out. What do you ask your
Wow.
parallel self? What do you do? What about choices? Because every time you make a choice, your parallel self might make another choice. It's a similar universe, but it's not exactly like our universe, right? So, what
Mhm.
differences, what small differences might change history?
Yeah, and it's not exactly fantasy. It's like you can get there from where we are now,
Yeah,
the
exactly. And
type of writing.
that's what he excels at. Robert J. Sawyer is
Mm.
another case in point. He's got his full collection of short story in three books. Space, Earth, and Time are the three volumes, and you can get them on Kindle very cheaply, and they should be on Audible and other places as well. And there is complete repertoire of short stories that he's written. He does really sort of optimistic science fiction. So
Mhm.
you don't often get the doom and gloom that you get like from Jurassic Park or something like that, where invariably the hubris of people, things go horribly wrong and the dinosaurs eat you. He kind of looks at the good side, how things might work out better or different twists on things. Like
Yeah.
he did lots of different stories that are well worth getting. Very optimistic writer. Actually, his books are on Audible now. The WWW trilogy, Wake, Watch, and Wonder, about a blind girl that can see through the internet and can actually sees the internet come alive and become aware. and there's sort of an artificial intelligence online that's starting to actually think and react to things.
It's
And
fascinating. I mean,
yeah,
I gotta say, we have to wrap in a second, but I just wanted to say that there is so many elements of fantasy that I used to just kind of ignore, or it would, bypass my consciousness because I'm like, if it's fantasy, I don't think I'd be into it. But these kind of, hybrid models of bringing in a fantasy, but taking our realities and saying, but what if you could intertwine these and then make a new reality out of all that, is just a fascinating thing to think about. Mike, thanks for the recommendations. This is awesome. We have to get you back on to keep talking short stories.
oh yes, there's lots more where that came from. Starless Sea by Aaron Morgenstern.
I'm in the middle of that right
it's
now.
it's a
Jinx.
novel that is built on stories and fascinating there.
Exactly. A
Charles DeWitt
library
is
outside
another
the
one.
universe of libraries.
Yep,
That's such a great song.
lots
Yeah,
of
Aaron Morgenstern. Thanks, Mike. We'll
wonderful
talk to you
books.
soon.
All righty, a pleasure.
That's the thing with Mike Feir. He's just so always reading something, listening to something. So there's a gazillion things to always talk about. You can catch him on Kelly and Company weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. But Mike Feir's segment on Thursdays for where he talks all things audio entertainment, and technology. That's it for our episode of AMI Audiobook Review. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, happy audiobook listening.
This was an AMI podcast. For more accessible media, visit ami.ca.